Alrighty, you lovely people. I hope you had a nice stretch. And so we can finally do the deep dive into constraints. Now, just remember, just to refresh our memory really quickly, constraints, again, are setting limitations on what we can do. They remove options from consideration. They take things off the table. That were just things we cannot do. We will not consider. We'll have to look at for something, what our other options are. Now, in the reading from Robert Nozick, he argues for two things, kind of at the same time. So it might be, I think if you read it carefully, it'll come out. But I understand, like, the first time it can be kind of confusing because he's kind of doing a few different things all at once. But I'll tease the two things apart that are very important. So first of all, he is trying to show what moral considerations could justify constraints. Why could we have them? Why does it make sense to have limitations on what we can do? And pretty strong limitations. Where would these come from? Why do they matter? But what's interesting during that argument, he believes he simultaneously discovers what he calls a libertarian side constraint. And this libertarian constraint is just a constraint against aggression or doing harm to others. And that might not be too surprising, as it does seem that if we have any constraints at all, doing harm seems to be, or at least, harm. Yeah, a constraint against harm seems to be pretty important. So let's start with the first part, and that's the most important, and then the rest will flow fairly naturally, is what is Nozick's argument for justifying constraints at all? Why have them? I mean, that is, why not just do what John Stuart Mill says and, promote the overall goodness of outcomes? Maybe just do it fancy, like, John, no, we won't do the utilitarianism of rights. We'll do the fancy pants security way that John Stuart Mill gives us. But again, it's still going to all be about, the overall goodness, back to consequentialism. And well, if you go to page 32 of Nozick, jump on over to page 32 of Nozick, scroll down again all the way to the bottom. Here on page 32, you see Nozick says, why not hold that some persons have to bear some costs that benefit other persons more for the sake of overall social good? But there is no social entity with a good that undergoes some sacrifice for its own good. There are only individual people, different individual people with all their own individual lives. Using one of these people for the benefit of others uses him and benefits the others, nothing more. So what is Nozick saying? It's very interesting. There's a lot actually here. I can't talk about it all, but I'll get the highlights. What Nozick is saying is you, me, each of us is an individual person. Each of us is living our own life. But we can't say the same about a social entity. Society is not a person. Society is not an entity like you, me. You'd be like, good God, no, I'm not Professor Gray. Yeah, dude, stuff, nightmare fuel, right? I don't even want to be Professor Gray, but here I am. Anyway, what was I talking about? Society, not an entity living. It's not a living entity. It's not living its own life. I mean, it's something. Society is something. I mean, I'm not poo-pooing it, but it's not like you or me. It's not living a life. It's not, there's just so many differences between how you and I live versus how society, the collective, goes about its business, shall we say. And so what Nozick is showing is skepticism about focusing on the good of that, this composite entity of different individuals, because that's all society is. Society is a composite of individual persons, maybe unified by geography or common purpose or identity, whatever, but it's still a composite entity. It's composed of real individual lives like you and me, like what we have. And so Robert Nozick wants to take this seriously. Side note, he doesn't want to become an egoist like Ayn Rand either. Everyone's going to matter. We'll see how he does it. But he is kind of, you notice, he's starting very similar to Rand, talking about each of us has lives and our lives matter in a way that the society just doesn't have that type of life. And so why should we be concerned about society's good as opposed to your good and my good? And Robert Nozick takes this seriously, this idea very seriously. And we talked about this already last week, very recently, a few modules ago at least. We did talk about this idea about how individual persons are owed respect. And respect means, not forcing that person to sacrifice themselves or their own good for the good of the many. Yeah, we cannot, respecting a person means you don't sacrifice their good for the, on the altar of the greater good. The greater good. Ugh, I hate, yeah, okay. So what justifies this respect for individuals? Notice, again, it's going to be respect for all individuals, not just respecting yourself, that's egoism, but respecting yourself and everyone else. This is going to be more important, respecting each of us. I respect you, you respect me. That's more important than respecting this overall good of society. Well, go to page 30 of Robert Nozick. Go to 30. Scroll all the way down again. Scroll all the way down there, and you'll see where Nozick says, constraints upon action reflect the underlying Kantian principle that individuals are ends and not merely means. They may not be sacrificed or used for the achieving of other ends without their consent. Individuals are inviolable. Inviolable? I can read words, I just can't say them. Anyway, you got it there. Anyway, I'm not going to go much deeper than what Nozick says right there, because we are going to go into the details of Immanuel Kant in a few modules. We're going to get there, and it's a complex argument. Kant's argument is, again, Kant will argue why we need to treat people as ends and not merely as means alone. We'll get there. We don't need to do that today. We'll just lay the groundwork for that. Because if you read Nozick, I think you get the idea, especially what follows that passage I just read. He starts talking about things like tools and how tools are different from people. And I think you can get that. People are people who need to be respected in certain ways, where tools are just things. Tools are just things. And we don't need to respect them in the same way we respect a person. It's like, oh, pencil, can I please use you to write things? Yes, thank you. I'll write some things down. You think I'm crazy, right? You see a person doing that, you'd be like, that's cute. Let's send them to a mental hospital. They need to be evaluated. They might be dangerous, talking to things. Whereas it's very different if I said to my wife, Jenny Penny, write this down. Take these notes for me. Because my wife is not like the pencil. I can't just compel my wife to do whatever I want. Yes, we need permission, as Nozick says. We need consent to treat people in certain ways. Yes, I don't ask a thing for its permission, but I have to ask a person, says Nozick. And I think a lot of us can, I hope that's intuitive, that people are different from things, from tools. But what makes people so special? What is the difference between a person and a pencil? And I think the things that Nozick mentions shouldn't be too surprising, as we've seen these before. That Nozick picks three. He says our rationality, our free will, and our moral agency are what make people pretty special. And again, we've seen these before when we talked about what separates humans from non-human animals. Nothing surprising about these things. But what's interesting from Nozick, he says he doesn't think those are enough. He says, yes, those three are important, but they do not seem to, he gives some odd examples you can read about why he thinks they're not important. I won't go into. I think if you read it, it's not mysterious. But what's interesting is that he thinks they're not enough, and that we need something else or something more, let's say. Because I think we need those three. You just need something further to justify constraints on how we treat each other and why I have to ask permission to do things to other people. Why do I have constraints like that? Well, go to page 50. If you go to page 50, scroll down just a little ways this time, and here you'll see Nozick say that, he says, I conjecture that the answer is connected with that elusive and difficult notion, the meaning of life. A person's shaping of his life in accordance with some overall plan is his way of giving meaning to his life. Only a being with the capacity to so shape his life can have or strive for meaningful life. And we've talked about this idea a lot in this class. We've kind of seen it keep coming up again and again. Seems kind of important. Again, the idea that humans have this ability to create plans and lead a structured life. Remember, that's what Mill said our higher faculties were. That's what Bernard Williams said was essential to our integrity. Again, all these thinkers are talking about our ability to create plans and lead structured lives and how that's so morally important for us as humans and really, matters. in some fundamental, powerful ways. And so for Nozick, yes, that ability to make plans, lead a structured life, that is essential, the very foundation of the meaning of life, or at least having a meaning of life, if we don't want to be so dramatic, I guess. You know, the idea of the meaning of life is having a life of your own, that you have a significant measure of control over. Of course, we're not egoists. You have to respect other people because other people have that same capacity and desire to have a measure of control over their lives. And so that will have to be respected. Yeah, we're not egoists, but still we are valuing the individual life because it's all we got. Each one of us has that. So that's how you can see how we can take Ayn Rand's egoistic insight, apply the principle of equal consideration to it. Oh, I know we haven't talked about that in a while, but yeah, or equal treatment, I think. Yeah, that's what I meant. Principle of equal treatment. Yeah, we treat people equally because they all have one life to live and it really matters to them. And Nozick says that's where our constraints come from. Constraints prevent me from taking over your life without your permission. If you want to join in, great, but I can't force you. I can't be like that evil captain. Remember the evil captain who wants to shoot all the villagers? Yeah, I cannot be like that evil captain who tries to take over Jim's life by making Jim shoot a villager and save the others. And so Jim is under no compulsion to do what the captain wants Jim to do and shoot one villager. No, Jim has his own life, his own plans, and Jim can therefore honor the constraint against doing harm and refuse to shoot the villagers. It's the captain who violates the constraint by shooting all 20 villagers. Jim had nothing to do with that. It's unfair to blame it on him like utilitarianism might. And notice, by justifying constraints, Nozick has already given us a constraint. Again, what Nozick calls a libertarian side constraint, which of course is just this basic constraint against aggression or against harming innocents. And apart from that constraint, again, when we're thinking about the meaning of life and having control over your life plans, we can start to imagine a lot of constraints that might follow. You know, again, taking seriously the idea that people, not society, people have lives and plans that ought to be respected. And so we might see like constraints against lying and deception and against coercion and exploitation, whatever. Lots of possible constraints could start coming into play. And so now I think you're starting to see how deontology is going to work. Deontology often does try to find something special. In Nozick's case, finding, you know, the meaning of life or the ability to make plans, lead a structured life. And yeah, and then use that to identify things that matter other than overall goodness. That's just deontology, right? And so that's what Nozick is doing. He's saying the ability for a person to live a meaningful life, that has intrinsic moral value that is separate from the goodness of outcomes. And yeah, that's deontology. There's something else other than overall goodness of outcomes. It's living, each individual living their life. And so deontology is going to use that to place constraints on what you may do to other people. And at the very least, we can disagree over what that list involves. Again, Elizabeth Anscombe, Robert Nozick disagree on the list, but they clearly think there is a constraint against harm. But what does that constraint against harm mean exactly? What exactly are we prevented from doing? In some cases, it might seem obvious, but we might want to flesh that out a bit so we can handle more difficult cases. But before I do that dive, I think we've done a little bit enough. I think I'm hungry. I want a snack. I want to live a meaningful life eating my Cheetos. Oh my gosh. Actually, I might be out. Crap. I hope I have some left. I'm actually, Wegmans! I'll call them up. This might be a longer break than normal. I wait for my Cheetos to come. So, hey, have a fancy dinner. Why not? Maybe more than a snack. Let's have that snack. I'm losing my mind, I think. Help me. You snack, I snack eventually, and then we'll get back after that to talk a little bit more about constraints. All right, I'll see you back here in a few.